Hey guys, Mr. Wheeler here. This section is on biodiversity at risk. The first term that we need to know is mass extinction. Mass extinction is the extinction of many species in a relatively short period of time. Scientists warn that we are in the midst of a mass extinction. Over the past 200 years, between 1800 and 2000, 25% of all species on Earth may have become extinct, and this is due to anthropogenic causes. This graph shows the major extinction events over geological time. And so this x-axis is a reverse x-axis because this is millions of years ago. So we find ourselves at current time, 0 million years ago, on the right side of this graph. And so we see the general trend that species have increased over time, but all of these green arrows correspond to major extinction events. And so we could see that through geologic time, we have had 5 major extinction events. What puts species especially at risk for extinction are if they have small populations in limited areas. And so species that are especially at risk are ones that are migratory, ones that require large or special habitats, or ones that are exploited by humans. We classify endangered and threatened species, we classify species that are at risk by classifying them as endangered or as threatened. The term endangered means that the species is likely to become extinct if protective measures are not taken immediately. This species is considered threatened if a species that has a declining population and is likely to become endangered if not protected. So endangered species are on the verge of extinction. Threatened species are on the verge of endangerment. Some examples in Pennsylvania of endangered species are the peregrine falcon and the northern flying squirrel. I'll provide a website that lists all of the endangered and threatened species, but there's a couple of threatened species that I could list for you as well. There's the small-footed bat is a threatened species, and then the long-eared owl is also a threatened species in Pennsylvania. This graph shows the species that are known to be threatened or extinct worldwide. And you could see that the biggest portion of species that are threatened or extinct are plants at 30,827 at the time that this table was published. And so one of the biggest causes of species being threatened or extinct is anthropogenic, so human-caused habitat destruction and fragmentation. And so this causes or accounts for 75% of all extinctions that are now occurring. For example, the Florida panther, this is their original range, this whole purple area, all the way from Florida to as far as Missouri and Oklahoma. But if you look closely at this chart, the area where it has stripes and it's a little bit darker, that's their current range. And so their original range, as indicated by as predicted or how it was estimated in 1500, is the purple, and then the current range, you can see it's been substantially decreased to a small area in southern Florida, mostly in the Everglades. And so this is because of humans developing cities and towns and highways and roads and fragmenting their habitat to the point where they don't really have a place to live. And so that combined with hunting, we have these cats, these lions that are on the verge of extinction. Very similarly, in the northern United States, the mountain lion its range has been decreased out of the east, and it now only exists in the western United States. But originally, the mountain lion used to be, the original range used to be in the eastern United States. When we're talking about threats to species, a big threat is other species themselves. And so if you have an invasive species, that is a species that can threaten local biodiversity. And so we need to be able to distinguish between the terms exotic species and invasive species. And so an exotic species is a species that is not native to a particular region. So you can have an exotic species but it might not necessarily be invasive, because what makes it invasive is that not only is it exotic, but it's also threatening the local biodiversity. And so invasive species have a set of characteristics that allow them to become, or allow them to act invasively. And so these characteristics include they have the ability to tolerate a variety of habitat conditions. They can grow and reproduce rapidly, and so these are our strategists oftentimes. They compete aggressively for resources, and then the last thing is they lack natural predators or pests in the new ecosystem. So it allows for these species to thrive, and they can take over and choke out the local species that are already present, thus causing the local species to be threatened or endangered. And so one example in the United States is fire ants. So fire ants, they are a problem in the southeastern United States. Fire ants are not native to North America at all, and they were first brought into the country by accident. But now that they're here, they are spreading unchecked because they lack natural pests or predators in the environment, and they have no problem thriving as an organism. Another threat to biodiversity is poaching and overhunting. And so poaching deals with the hunting, fishing, harvesting, and the trading of wildlife illegally. An example of some examples of poaching would be the poaching of rhinoceroses or elephants for their ivory. In poor countries, local species, they're often sold for use as pets. We watched the video when we're covering aquatic ecosystems, how the kids were cyanide fishing for the exotic fish to sell to the pet stores. Different house plants can be poached, wood, so if people live in the rainforest, maybe they'll cut down trees that the wood is very valuable, and so that would also be considered poaching. Whether there's things that are taken for food or for herbal medicine, those are all examples of poaching. A lot of people think that poaching is just hunting, but it's not just hunting. It can be cutting down trees. It could even be you're guilty of poaching if you're even trading wildlife illegally as well. Going back to overhunting, two major examples in North America are the passenger pigeon, which was hunted to extinction, and then the American bison, which was on the brink of extinction. But the American bison population is coming back a little bit. Another threat to biodiversity is pollution. This can include pesticides, herbicides, cleaning agents, drugs, other chemicals. Anything that finds its way into the environment that can be harmful to the environment is considered pollution, and so that is also a major threat to biodiversity. Some areas, they have species that only exist in that area, and these species are called endemic species. And so whenever we have a species that is endemic, it means that we're not going to find it anywhere else on Earth. And so an example of an endemic species would be the honey creepers of Hawaii. The honey creepers, these are birds that they thrive on the Hawaiian Islands, and they're only found there. There are a lot of endemic species in the United States. Many types of crayfishes and freshwater fishes are endemic species. One endemic species that was native to only Lake Erie and that is now extinct is the blue pike. The blue pike was a fish that really launched the Lake Erie fishing industry, but eventually it was overfished, and other factors led to its demise, and now it's no longer present in the lake. And since it was an endemic species, it is now extinct overall. So endemic species, or endemic plants in particular, they're often used as indicators of overall biodiversity because they're stationary and they form the basis of the ecosystems on land. And so if you have a ecosystem that has a lot of endemic species, then we could describe that area as having a very high biodiversity level. There are certain types of habitats that we would consider them areas of critical biodiversity. These are tropical rainforests, coral reefs, and islands. So tropical rainforests, they cover less than 7% of the Earth's surface, but they contain over half of the world's species. The problem with tropical rainforests and why they're in a critical state is because they're being cleared for farming, cattle grazing, or timber. Coral reefs, also area of critical biodiversity. They're used for food, tourism, producing some chemicals. They protect coasts from waves and flooding, and they're threatened by a variety of things, including coral bleaching, overfishing, destructive fishing, and pollution. And then the last area of critical biodiversity are islands. And so I already mentioned the Hawaiian Islands and their endemic honey creepers. But islands are areas of critical biodiversity because since they are away from the main continent, oftentimes they will have many unique species that have evolved separately from the mainland, and therefore those species aren't going to exist anywhere else. And so Conservation International, which is a private group, they have identified 35 what they call biodiversity hotspots, labeled on this chart in green. And what a biodiversity hotspot is it's the most threatened area of high species diversity. And so these areas have high numbers of endemic species, and what makes them a hotspot and why they've been identified as such is because they're threatened by human activities. And so if you look closely at this map, I'll zoom in on North America here, there are just a few biodiversity hotspots in the United States. Well, there's 3 actually. And so there's the first one is the Hawaiian Islands. Second one is the California Floristic Province. And then the last one, if you look closely, it's just the very tip of Florida, and it's the Florida Everglades. And so those are all considered biodiversity hotspots in the United States. And so these biodiversity hotspots seek to protect organisms like this Cecropia moth. Here's the tulip poplar tree, the desert pupfish, and then the northern spotted owl. These are all examples of organisms that they are either threatened or endangered, and by setting aside those biodiversity hotspots or identifying those areas as hotspots, we can hopefully try to save species such as these. I already mentioned the 3 hotspots in the United States, and that's it. A couple other things to mention about the United States is that the United States is known for its high biodiversity of, I already mentioned a couple of these, the freshwater fishes, the crayfish, but also mussels, snails, pine trees, and sunflowers. So in terms of global biodiversity, that's what the United States is known for. But areas like the California Floristic Province, they're threatened by agriculture, housing, dam construction, overuse of water, destructive recreation, mining. All these things threaten biodiversity, not only in the United States, but globally. And so these are things that we need to pay attention to as environmental scientists, and we need to do our best to preserve the Earth's biodiversity.